Transport Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I'd like to remind everybody that this meeting is broadcast live via the County Council's website and will also be available for viewing after the meeting. Could I ask everybody to switch their phones to silent and remember to turn on their microphones when they speak, and just as importantly, turn them off again when they've finished speaking. Thank you. So we'll go straight on to agenda item 1. Is it your wish that I sign the minutes as a true and accurate record?
Agreed.
Agreed? Thank you. Item 2, question time. I've received no questions. Item 3, questions asked by members under standing order. I've received none of those. And likewise, there are no urgent items. Could members declare any interest they have in the proceedings this afternoon? We have none of those. And could members declare any party whip that's been applied? No, none of that. I've received no petitions, so we'll move on to the main item of this afternoon, item 8, the Environment and Transport 2018-2019 Capital Programme and the Highways and Transportation Work Programme. This is on pages 11 to 42 of your agenda pack, and the Director, Anne Carruthers, will take us through it. So Anne, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, as you say, this report sets out the capital programme for highways for the coming year, as well as our Highways and Transport Work Programme. This is going to Cabinet next week, therefore we're seeking the committee's views and comments on that prior to going to Cabinet. Just the overall funding picture, to give you a bit of context, our budget, the revenue budget for the department, now that's the whole department, Environment and Transport, is 63 million. We have, however, to make 7.1 million savings over the next 4 years. So we're still challenged in terms of, 1, delivering the service out there, but 2, also delivering the savings. One of the other key changes that I will highlight to you, just as part of the context for this, as the committee is well aware, we're changing our approach to highways maintenance. You've had various reports to you in the previous year with our highways asset management policy and strategy, as well as our highways infrastructure asset management plan, which basically sets out a risk-based approach to highways maintenance. And this impacts then on what we are spending our budget allocations on and how we spend that to get best effect from that money. The whole approach is about moving to more preventative and minimising the amount of reactive work we need to do. But this, as I say, will evolve over time as we get more data and knowledge, etc., and apply that approach. I take you to Appendix A of the report, and that is actually our capital programme set out for you and summarised over the next year. First thing I will say about this, and apologies for this, but I have actually, or you should have been passed around an update to that table. The totals are the same as the original in the report. What has actually changed? For those categories that are shaded, we've slightly amended the amount we are now proposing to spend in the coming year on that area, as opposed to the table that was in the report originally is the one as agreed in the MTFS earlier this year at Cabinet and County Council. The reason for these changes are primarily, as I've just explained to you, we are getting more data all the time in terms of our assets and therefore more knowledge about how we should best manage them. That therefore reflects that we want to, in some cases, change what we are putting into that particular treatment. The other thing, and a prime example at the moment, is we've had a very severe winter. More severe than we've had for a lot of years. Therefore, and I'm sure you're all aware and your postbags are aware, we're seeing a lot more defects, namely potholes, appearing on the network, which we're having to deal with. Just to put that in context, from the 1st of March to today, we have had 1,117 pothole inquiries. Normally at this time of year, it's between 200-300 a month. So massive, increase there. Therefore, for instance, I'll just give you an example. The restorative patching we had originally under the MTFS, so when we devised that late last year, anticipated spending 4.8 million on that. As you'll see in the table just put in front of you, we've upped that now to 5.1 million, just under 5.2 million. As I say, we have to be able to flex a bit just for the nature of our business during the year to ensure that we're providing the right treatments and in the right way given the circumstances we're in. As I say, however, the overall totals have not changed. The other thing I would say about that table is the funding comes from a number of different areas. Part of this is DFT grant, for instance, our capital maintenance grant. Part of it is things like funding bids. For instance, we have some of the schemes are funded from Local Growth Fund, some of them are from National Productivity Infrastructure Fund, government funding, competitive funding streams. So there's a mix of, as well as our own LCC capital, there's a mix of funding sources that are behind this. The tables that follow that appendix in pages 20 to 35 show the breakdown of how we're actually intending to spend that money. And those totals for each do align with the table, the new table that's been put in front of you, the new capital programme summary table. Some of the detail in that is fairly high level, you'll see from some categories, but what we fully intend to do as we've worked up the detail programme, because often there is literally tens, if not hundreds of schemes underneath these, we will put these online so they're available for members, so members have that information. In addition, certain schemes such as the safety schemes, etc., if it's in your area, we will consult the local member at the time just prior to that happening, etc., so members will have a more detailed awareness of those. I think moving on to the Appendix B then, that summarises basically the work programme for the highways and transport element of the department for the coming year. As you'll see, there's a whole multitude of different initiatives, projects and activities going on. I don't propose to go into any detail on that at the moment, but I'm more than happy to answer questions that members may have on that. I'll stop there. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Anne. Members, over to you. Would anybody like to ask questions? Mr. Bolter.
Thank you, Chair. Having looked through this quite carefully, I can't find anywhere in here about any road gullies. And I thought it was one of the priorities actually do the road gullies and renew, replace and clear them, but I can't find anywhere in these papers at all about road gullies.
Thank you. This is a breakdown for the capital spend. That's a revenue activity, absolutely, because it's not seeing an improvement. It's about pure maintenance in terms of cleaning out, etc. So that's a revenue activity.
Unless I'm mistaken, Chair, previously replacement of road gullies was formed part of the capital programme. So that's finished now. If it's no longer in here, it's now gone back to the revenue programme.
The gullies work, yeah, as I say, the vast majority of that is ongoing maintenance, therefore it comes under the revenue. If we do need capital works in terms of major schemes, that will come under a different category here.
Did you want to say something, Nick?
Yeah, if it's a case of actually fixing the infrastructure around gullies, etc., that'd be kind of a major sort of drainage type scheme. That would be one of the capital schemes listed in the capital scheme in the design. It's under capital schemes in design, but that covers a range of schemes, including anything that is specifically to address gullies or drainage issues that have come up.
Blake.
Thank you, David. Just so it's on the record, the MTFS does include an uplift of £600,000 on the revenue side to help assist with the maintenance of signs, lines and gullies. So that is something the Cabinet did put into the MTFS. So in that respect, Mr. Bolter's absolutely correct.
That's helpful, thank you. Have you finished, Mr. Bolter?
For now, yes.
Okay, have a rest. Mr. Pearson.
Anne, just could you go through, we had the briefing a little bit, that there is flexibility here, as you're aware, in any programme. There's unforeseen capital projects that come along, or we're faced with, we've had some very bad weather recently. Could you just go through how the flexibility kicks in?
I mean, basically, as I mentioned earlier in the introduction, what we will do is we'll look at the priority of the need of whatever is coming up. As I say, we've just had a very harsh winter there, so we need to look at our programmes to say, well, actually, we're going to need more in the reactive, the restorative patching to deal with that. We can't just leave it, it's got to be dealt with. We will then actually have to weigh that up across the programme to say, okay, what are we taking that out of? Are we doing less surface dressing, etc.? If ultimately we feel we can't balance it within, we will have a wider corporate discussion to see if there's any additional funding we can seek. But the first stance will always be to balance with across the overall budget within the department. And it is that swings and roundabouts. What is the most priority? Obviously, safety's got to be the number one priority. We've got to always deal with that. If there's some improvement works, etc., that can be put off to the following year, that's the type of decision we have to take.
Thank you, Anne. Mr. Poland.
Thank you, Chair. Some really good stuff in here. I was very pleased to see some of the projects that we are proposing to take forward. I do have questions, though, if you could just give us a bit more detail on the strategic economic plan, specifically for the Anstey Lane A46. I noticed there two of the biggest areas of spending, and I certainly would be interested just to hear just a bit more details on what the plans are for those. Thank you.
Certainly. That Anstey Lane scheme, funding, we sought funding from Highways England on their, it was Growth and Housing Fund stream of funding. Again, it was a competitive one, and literally we were in doing work for them for literally about 18 months in order to secure £5 million, but we did secure the £5 million, so it was a really successful and pleasing outcome there towards that scheme. The other 2.8 million is developer contributions via the city for its link to the Ashton Green housing development. Fundamentally, the scheme is signalising the roundabout at the E46 where it meets Anstey Lane, dualling from the E46 down to the Benyon Road roundabout and some junction and some improvements in that junction, and that is about additional capacity there and facilitating that housing growth and bringing forward that housing site. The other scheme there, I should say that's a bigger scheme, 27 million. M1 Junction 23, again, it's a combination of funding pots coming from the Local Growth Fund, the Highways England Housing and Growth Fund again, and developer contributions. And that's about signalising that Junction 23 of the M1, dualling on the E512, which is the road that comes off Junction 23 into Shepshed and Loughborough, and some access improvements, new roundabouts along there as well. Again, it's about facilitating primarily housing growth, but also employment growth.
Thank you, Anne. Mr. Coxon.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Page 21 of Appendix A, Chairman. The rail strategy works. I mean, the future need is becoming more significant for the Burton to Leicester rail line. Can I be assured that with the cost banding D that there is enough money to give this full justice and to looking at our rail strategy throughout Leicestershire, but obviously North West Leicestershire is where I'm coming from.
On that, as you say, the cost banding D of that is money there that actually, under our current rail strategy, which you know was approved by County Council last year, or by Cabinet last year, sorry, and it's a joint one with ourselves, the city and the local enterprise partnership. That money is a pot there that will enable us to do some investigatory works to rail improvement schemes we might want to see come forward. In relation to the Leicester to Burton line, I'm sure Mr. Coxon's aware, we have studied this extensively, and again, it was either earlier last year or the back of the end of the previous year, probably the previous year, 2016. We have done, the latest study we had done it was in combination with North West Leicestershire. We reported through Cabinet, etc. And that study concluded that in order to get that rail line up to the standard required for passenger transport, passenger services, was in the order of something like 175 million. Basically because there's significant subsidence issues on the line. There's currently, again, significant speed restrictions. Some sections of the line are down to 20 miles an hour, and there's signalling issues as well. So in order to upgrade that, the cost is of that order. In addition to that, the study concluded that we'd need in the order of, I think it was between 2 and 3 million a year revenue subsidy, because there wasn't sufficient passenger demand that would cover the operating costs of that railway. At that time, Cabinet took the decision that given that scenario, it is not something we would see as a priority to pursue, because getting the likelihood of securing that funding, and obviously we as a county council are not in a position to put up that kind of funding, would be very low. I think the other point that I think people often forget about the Leicester to Burton is the actual line now stops just short of King Power Stadium. It no longer goes into Leicester Station, and in fact the cord that would take you to join the Midland Main Line northbound has been built on. So physically the line would only go to the outskirts of Leicester, which people would need to interchange presumably onto a bus to get into the centre of the Leicester City, which again does not help in terms of that attraction for people to use that line. In those respects, therefore, that project is not a priority for us at the moment, and this funding here is about any other initiative that comes up that we may need a bit of study work in order to get off the ground, to take forward, to hopefully then seek future funding from. Just to reassure you to some instances, though, you may well be aware that one of our priorities is the Leicester to Coventry upgrade, the Lou Knuckle as it gets called, which is about direct services there. Midlands Connect are taking forward a study on this as part of their rail hub work, and that itself is, significant funding is going into that, and work with Network Rail in order to understand what needs to be done to achieve that. So there are some key priorities within our rail strategy that actually are being pursued at the moment.
Can I thank
Yeah, I'll come back, John. Yes,
Can
please.
I thank the good lady for the reply, Chairman, and the only thing I can say is that the railway goes both ways, Chairman, not just one way.
Very good observation. Thank you. I have Dr. Bremner, please.
Thank you, Chair. I want to take you to page 15 and also the sheet that's been handed out with a little story from this morning. It's striking the figures you gave us of the reporting coming in from the public of potholes of 1,017, I think you said. 100, I beg your pardon, a digit is missing. Just a small instance in Market Harbour and Western Avenue. I saw 2 potholes on that street, and within 6 days they were marked in white and filled. And then this morning I met a worker from the County Council, had a chat with him. He was surveying the main street in Market Harbour. And I mentioned this to him, and he said, 6 days, that's really slow. So what my thrust of this comment is that the more the public report defects, the quicker they can be fixed. But the public also need to know if we're changing our strategy, they may have fixed in their mind that the deeper the hole is, wherever it is, County Council will come and fix it. But under the new strategy, it will be a risk assessment. So if it's in the rut of the road where the bus passes, it's a priority. If it's on a road that isn't used very much, it's less of a priority. But it might be 10 centimetres deep. So I think the communication of this change in strategy needs to be in the public domain so that it may head off unnecessary calls or on internet communication. The other thing, if I may, Chair, on the sheet, and I know it's outside the budget, but it is in the bottom of your sheet under future developments. There are many areas in Leicestershire have a concern about speed cameras and the type of speed camera that might be installed if it's number plate recognition and associated fine if someone is speeding, for example. But there's a particular area in my division in Lebanon, which is a village which has an A road running through it, and they do have some concerns about speed cameras. So I'd be quite interested, as budgets come forward and plans come forward in the next couple of years, where that speed camera rollout would occur, or where it's likely to occur. That may not be a question that can be answered just now, but it's just to flag it as it's on the list. Another question is on page 21, just for information of what it is, really. As Market Harborough is experiencing quite a large amount of development at the current time, so it's an increase in traffic and residents and also visitors, the high street of Market Harborough is what I would like to call a funnel. You come in and it's a bottleneck and then you're into the high street, which is really a Victorian street. So my question is, under the county-wide micro-simulations and scheme assessment development programme, what is road traffic micro-simulation? And does it bear any reality to what happens on the ground? Thank you.
I think,
Good questions.
Anne, that's a good question for you.
Yeah,
And I think Blake would like to add something as well.
Yeah, I'll go first this time. Three really good questions, actually, and I'm rather impressed how diligent Paul is in looking at the detail of some of the policies. So just with the potholes, I recognise what Paul's conveying to the committee, and that's how we communicate, how we deal with current potholes. And I've recently done some media work to try and improve our communication in this respect. And most members will be aware now of Category 1 defects, Category 2 defects, how we deal with Category 1, whether they represent an immediate safety risk, in which case we endeavour to sort them out within 3 days. So the highways engineer that you might have been speaking to this morning is absolutely correct. If it was a safety issue, 6 days does seem rather long, but 3 days is how we intend to deal with those category 1 defects. The Category 2 defects will be programmed in, so they'll get dealt with, but they'll get programmed in over, I think it's a 90-day period. Paul's absolutely correct, though, that this October the policies will be changing, and I think I'm right in saying that there'll be a separate report perhaps to this committee about the risk-based model that the department will employ, because there's a lot more to it than the county just embarking on changing its policies. Actually, this is the national rules and guidance, how we administer these responsibilities is changing too, and that will need some scrutiny from this scrutiny panel. So prior to the implementation of these new policies, we'd expect this panel to have a good scrutiny of that said policy. In terms of the average speed cameras, I'm glad that's been raised, because I've had a few questions in my inbox recently, and a few members who are concerned about the extension of speed cameras towards the A50 roundabout, for instance. I think it's now well reported that the average speed camera project that we embarked on is dependent on the government being able to allow us to keep the revenue generated, because the misconception is that we currently get to keep money generated through speed cameras. That's not the case. It tends to go back to London, and in order to have a sustainable enforcement or a policy around speed cameras, we will need the revenue to be able to roll that out even wider, but no doubt Anne will speak about that. So two hopefully coherent answers to two of the questions, but I'll leave Anne to deal with the third.
Thanks very much. Yeah, sorry, I would just add as well to what Blake said in terms of, you know, the new approach to asset management or highway maintenance and our communications around that. I think you're absolutely correct. It's going to be vital, and it will be challenging to get out there to people that, one, the system is changing, because it's quite easy to understand actually if you're over a certain depth, for instance, we'll react in a certain time, to a much more matrix-based approach. There'll be a number of factors we take into account, which then triggers how quickly we will respond to that particular issue. And that will be difficult, because it isn't just 1, 2 or 3 type system that we have now, I think it will be difficult. But I think the main thing we have to be able to communicate is actually we are moving to a completely different risk-based approach, so people will see something different and may get a different response, etc. And I think that's challenging for us and it's challenging for the public, but it's something we really do have to tackle and try and hopefully do that well. Blake's absolutely correct in terms of the speed camera rollout. Obviously, what we are proposing to do, and it should be coming online kind of late summer, early September, is hold the trial for the speed cameras. This has been funded. As you know, we have £500,000 available for that, to fund that by the County Council. However, we have no ongoing funding for that beyond the trial unless the government agree to change their existing arrangements in terms of keeping the fines from the fines that would be accrued from those cameras. At the moment, that goes into the Exchequer. So that we do not at the moment have any certainty there will be a rollout. Obviously, we will keep pursuing that with Treasury in particular. The last point, your last question, microsimulation, what is that? It's not just a technical term we put to bamboozle people, but it's a wonderful world of transport modelling. And you probably have been lucky enough never to have been involved in it, because it certainly is, you know, an acquired taste. Microsimulation is the type of model whereby it looks forensically over a very small area like a town centre, and literally you can look at every single junction. You have your width of each lane, you have your radii and your curvature, you have all your timings in for your signals, you have where your pedestrian crossings are, and we simulate the traffic. How they build it at first is, and why a number of you have seen cameras appear around your town centre, is actually we're collecting the data to find out what's happening at the moment. They build the model and they then check that against the data that we have that says it's going on in the middle of Market Harbour in peak hour on a Tuesday afternoon. And actually, once we are convinced that it's replicating what's happening on the ground, we can then test different scenarios. We'll put a traffic signal junction in there, we'll try that, we'll change that into a roundabout, we'll build a bypass. What happens? Did not commit to anything there, absolutely did not. And what happens then? But actually, it's at a really detailed level. Most of the models we talk about, and I'm sure you'll have heard the word LITM, which is our big model for Leicestershire, whereby we will look at new schemes across the county, etc. That's on a much, much bigger strategic scale. These ones are for actually looking at really in a micro simulation, really small scale. If we stuck in a traffic signal junction there, what impact does that have on traffic? What length of queues have you got? Has it made things better or not? So it's really just small scale modelling that allows us to then take a decision about whether it's worth that investment or not.
Thank you for the detail, Anne. Mr. Bill, please.
On that, Chairman, I do wonder whether this simulation model takes a note of the noise of these heavy vehicles, the smell of them, the fact that they're rattling over broken drains, the fact that they're hitting traffic calming and causing. I do wonder how, to what degree it's a comprehensive scheme. But to come back to what John pointed out, and I'm with you all the ways, you know, John, on that. I often, well, having been involved in promoting rail reopenings for all my life, effectively, I've always realised that if consultants are put up to try to overload a scheme with costs, they will. But if consultants are asked to show us how a scheme can be done, they will. And you do wonder why a scheme which was going to cost, if I remember rightly, something like £13 million in capital in the 80s, has now gone up to 100-odd million now. I'm sure, I don't think there's been that much settlement across the western side of Leicestershire. I know we've got mines underneath there, but they all closed down so long ago that I do wonder whether costs have been overloaded. But there we are. That's just going back to the report. On page 15, there's reference to the Hinkley area project zone 4, which has now come down to one single junction, unfortunately. This junction is so key to trying to move people around the town. Can I ask that local members get sight of what is being proposed here? I know there was a problem in a compulsory purchase order across the Lidl car park, and it's not easy. And I know there's congestion underneath the railway bridge in the centre of town, and I know there's all kinds of problems on this one, but I think the earlier that local members have sight of what's proposed, the sooner we can actually hopefully make a positive contribution as to overcome problems. And what I can't see on this list, because it's already presumably agreed, is the Lancaster Road crossing, which is not a million miles away from this junction, but it's in the centre of town. And although that was meant to be starting in February, there's no sign of any activity on the ground, unless it started this morning. I think there's a few painted marks have arrived, but as this is such an essential scheme, people are really concerned that it's now well overdue. Right. Shall I pause there? I've got some other questions as well, Chairman.
Can we give the Director a chance to answer your questions?
Yes, okay.
On member consultation and the Lancaster Road crossing, if you have that information to hand, Anne?
If I can just take the opportunity and a couple of other things just to clarify for Mr. Bill. In terms of the microsimulation modelling, no, it doesn't look at air quality. That's a whole separate modelling exercise. And, you know, as he's well aware, the district councils are responsible for air quality. Therefore, they will be collecting that data and doing modelling where necessary. And as we're all aware, the whole point about older cars, well, the government is, I think, at the moment, grappling with how they best address that with petrol, diesel vehicles, etc. And again, is subject to other legislation. The rail costs from the 1980s, I'm sure the committee will appreciate as well that since the 1980s, there's been substantial change in terms of standards required by Network Rail, given that there have been a number over the years, a number of rail accidents, unfortunately, and each time that happens, there tends to be knock-on impacts in terms of safety requirements and rigour around the infrastructure. That, I'm sure, will go some way to explain the cost differences, as well as since the 80s we have seen considerable inflation. In terms of the junctions within Hinckley, there's actually 2 junctions there that are involved in that scheme. Certainly the local members affected by that will be consulted as early as we have got, you know, reasonable plans to have that discussion. And the Lancaster Road scheme, we had anticipated being on site early this month. I think it was early this month, not late last month, and that, you're absolutely correct, that's not happened yet. We went out and we have, when we got to going to just about to embark on the work, we have discovered there are significant statutory undertakers, utilities under there, which will hugely increase the cost of that scheme. We have now looked at how we can just move that scheme slightly, and that work is going on now. So the location, the exact location we had intended it to be in, is not going to be possible because of those utilities presence and the implications on costings, and therefore we will be consulting again on that revised location. It's not much further away, but that's the reason for the hold up, unfortunately, with that scheme, because I know how important it is to the local area.
Thank you, Anne. Mr. Bill, would you like to continue?
Yes, thank you. That information. The page 20. Well, I'll link this one. We have a number of schemes are referred to on page 20 and 22, which I have an interest in. One is the A46 expressway and its impact, and it's the impact I've got most concerns about, and the transport plan to develop the strategic transport plan to sit alongside the growth plan. Now, I've been through all the information available to me, and I've made inquiries elsewhere because obviously if you try to represent your area effectively, you try to gather as much information as you can about what's going on in order to grasp the complexity of the situation. Sometimes people will give you information, other times they want to know who tipped you off in the first place. But we are here, Chairman, to represent people as well as help administer this authority. And in helping people, I think we need as much information as we possibly can gather. And I have concerns about the impact of the expressway and the transport plan, because having studied what I can see no reference to the existing congested states of Hinckley and Burbage and the impact this is likely to have on those roads. I mean, the same applies to the plan to rebuild the A5, which is obviously going to be hopefully done in parallel to all of this. So I'm trying to look ahead and find out just what the impact of what is being proposed here will have on the existing road structure. Because I don't think we're here simply to facilitate the movement of goods and peoples across the country as is proposed in these plans. We're also here to try to look after the interests of the people we actually represent who live alongside the roads which will be affected. And that's why I referred earlier to heavy lorries and noise, heavy lorries and air quality, and the fact that they drive through our towns and villages regardless of weight limits which have been imposed by this authority but not enforced by anybody else. So all I'm seeking really is an assurance that local members will be engaged in the process of assessing the impact of what is being suggested in these schemes. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, and I think it has to do with member consultation and involvement on the impact assessment.
I think, my answer to that one is yes, I would reassure local members, in fact all members across the county, will be engaged. Fundamentally, it will happen through a number of processes. I mean, I would remind everybody that, the title of the plan that's been referred to there is strategic. Therefore, the work that is being done at the moment is at a strategic level. We are looking out to 2050 with that plan, so it is high-level work. That will identify where there needs to be further work, which will come forward through local plans and a whole host of other issues at which local members are always engaged. So I would say yes, as local members are being engaged now through the strategic growth plan consultation, and that consultation, I'm sure they're fully aware, has been extended with the transport evidence that's available being out there now for consideration, and that will continue at each individual level beyond that through the more detailed work that will take place over the coming months and years. So yes, I would say local members will be. I would be assured that local members will be involved.
Thank you. Blake, you wanted to make a comment?
Yeah, just to quickly reinforce what the director just said. I mean, my understanding, in fact, my belief is we have a members advisory group which is made up of all the district and borough councils. I believe the city council sit on that, and we indeed are a stakeholder. And if you like, our primary interest is probably to do with highways matters, because we have a direct responsibility through this authority for those issues. But as you've just pointed out, the strategic growth plan is being consulted upon by all of the planning authorities and the borough and district councils at the moment. And through that mechanism, I'd imagine that all members will have an opportunity to be made aware of the assessments and the current workings, and also an opportunity to comment. The only other thing I would add is by now, I think the transport assessment, the impacts of the transport issues, the highways issues, has already been published and submitted to the members' advisory group. But as the director said, it is strategic. It will tell us perhaps what we already know. If you put growth in certain areas, there are going to be detrimental impacts. The next stage of the programme will be to identify what we do about those impacts. So the assessment does tell us to a greater or lesser degree what we already know, that there are detrimental impacts, but now we have to look, subject to the consultation and the work of the MAGS group, at how we deal with those impacts.
Thank you. I think we're beginning to wander a bit from the 12 months covered by this paper. So if you could confine your comments to the 12 months, Mr. Bill.
Yes, very quickly, Chairman. My concern is that there are various deadlines for commenting on the major developments going on in the southwest of the county, which close down next week, namely the freight depot, which closes on Tuesday, I think, and then there's the other, and the growth plan, which is extended to May. And I don't know of any detailed engagement with local members that has taken place. I have done my best to input what I think is going to be the impact, but there's been, I think the ability of us all as local members, as opposed to the MAG members, to get involved has been very superficial, and it concerns me that we're making decisions on behalf of people without those people who actually live alongside all these roads and in the villages, in fact, being engaged in the process. I do have concerns, and I want to be honest about this. I don't want to sort of say, well, I didn't say. I don't want to be told later on in the process, well, you had your chance. I'm trying to express it now that I have concerns about the impact of everything that is being done in our name without there being proper engagement of the people who will be mostly impacted.
Thank you for bringing that up, Mr. Bill. I think we've the officers have described the consultation process in full. Anne, did you want to add something else?
If I could, thanks. I'll just clarify that obviously, you know, through the strategic growth plan, it is a consultation, it is a public consultation. So yes, people are free to respond as individual residents, members, as an authority, you know, obviously whether district or county, etc., you know, that is open to absolutely everybody. Just to clarify, however, though, in mention of the strategic rail freight interchange, that is a completely separate process led by a developer going through the national strategic infrastructure process. So that is the national planning process. It's not down to a district authority as a planning authority. It's going through that national process, of which ultimately the Secretary of State determines, and that has its own process, set guidelines, timelines, etc. But equally within that is built in that consultation element at various different points in that process, but is separate to the strategic growth plan consultation.
Thank you, Anne. Can we move on to Mr. Hunt, please?
Thanks very much. It's a very interesting discussion. I've just got a few points to make. First of all, to thank the officers and indeed the Cabinet Member for preparing this report, which is very informative, and I think, you know, plans are at the basis of good practice, aren't they? Accepting that plans are dynamic and changes take place. Just to comment on this business of strategic plans and consultation, I think there is a tendency, an increasing tendency for plans to be sort of settled at the top and not taken up, except in the Leicester Mercury, if you're lucky sometimes. But they are strategic plans, and I accept that they have to have strategic decisions. But I can see where Mr. Bill's coming from. On the simulation, just to point on that it struck me that any systems that we bring in, new systems particularly, have to be justified against the cost benefit that they deliver. And my mind was wandering, and I thought, what's the use of having a system that will tell you exactly what to do with a junction if there's no money to actually do anything to the junction at the end of the day within a reasonable timescale? But I have absolute confidence in the officers that they wouldn't recommend a system if it didn't deliver in a financial way, as well as in the results, the output it produces. this isn't about Windsor Road, but Windsor Road happens to be in northwest Loughborough. And I'd just like to say on this one, this is a project this is a problem that's been running for over 10 years. And what has happened in this? It's a flood project. That's all you need to know, really. First of all, it was the highways who were asked to look at it. Then it was Severn Trent. Then it came back to the build. Then there was a silence because everybody had given up for a while. Then it came back to Severn Trent, I think, and eventually, hopefully, it's come back here. And this is a real problem for members who are, stuck between several agencies and sometimes several councils. And increasingly, one of the agencies will say, sorry, we can't do anything, and then it stops. So you have to re-engage the project. And obviously it goes back to the county council. The county council has looked at it. So I'm very pleased it's coming through. But I'd just like to hope, perhaps, that our customer services don't give up on these kind of issues, but give us a clear signpost forward to the next place to go if they don't feel it's a county council issue. That's the point I wanted to make. Finally, on the major point, really, which is on the asset management plan, the highways infrastructure management plan, and so on, and the way we're working. I understood that potholes were under the Crossland regime rather than the Carruthers regime. I remember being told that we were buffering up potholes work, so they would take rather longer. I think several weeks, perhaps 9 weeks was given for the maximum time. We wouldn't do them one at a time. This is the new approach seems to be confirming that, but therefore I'm surprised that we're doing them on an individual basis. So the question mark there, and comes back to the point, I think, of what Blake touchingly described as more media work. And we really need to get to understand as members what the limits are, and so that we can tell the public, well, if you've got a pothole and it's deeper than such and such, it will be done within such and such. And those numbers are really... yeah. There we go. That's it.
Thank you, Max. I think it's a plea from Mr. Hunt that the new regime be explained in more detail to members to help it get over to the members of the public. Blake, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, just to pick up on that very point, I'd agree with most of what Mr. Hunt's just said there, and I would concur that we haven't yet started to bring to the wider membership of the authority's attention the new policies, which I have already said will come through this panel. The policy will be implemented around October time, and we have to do that as a matter of direction from above. But I'll let Anne, if she wishes to, speak about some of the detail as to the current policy and where the road maintenance pothole policy is going. But I couldn't resist. We started off talking about micro-simulation, and one of the challenges we face as an authority is being prepared, and as every Cub Scout will tell you, the motto is be prepared. So part of the reason why we're now rolling out these micro simulations is to build the business cases in the event that a funding opportunity arises through a national government pot. So it's imperative, something we haven't been very good at and something that we haven't done particularly well before, is prepare ourselves to access in those short windows of opportunity that the government presents us with the right bids to be able to access the monies to improve the highways network. So the micro simulations will play an integral and important role in helping us achieve that objective. So remember, Cub Scout, be prepared.
Maybe I should mention, talk about Girl Guides. Anyway, no, Blake's absolutely correct on that. We need to be, some bidding rounds, for instance, I'm sure the second round of MPIF we had something like 6 weeks to go. If you don't have the evidence, somebody else is going to get the money somewhere else in the country. So we need to be ready to go for that. The other point I would make about our models, both the micro-simulation ones and the LITIM model, is we do a tremendous amount of work for developers, third parties, who we allow, when I say allow, they pay us to use our models. So I would just plant that seed in your mind as well. In terms of the flooding, And I can sense your frustration at, you know, the particular scheme, and I don't know the details, sorry, of your individual scheme. However, you are not alone in having a frustration about how do we deal with flooding, whose issue is it, how do we identify, is it a riparian owner, is it utility, is it highways, is it whoever. It is incredibly frustrating, and for officers as well. Fundamentally, I would remind members, however, our role, we have two roles in terms of flooding. One is the lead local flood authority, and we got that duty, I think, in 2014. So we have a statutory duty to, as a consultee on all planning applications in relation to flooding, so we give them comments in relation to flooding back to the planning authorities. But our other role is to investigate any floods where property has been impacted. So if somebody's property has been flooded, etc., and that's called a Section 19 investigation. Our duty in that role is to investigate, identify the parties who have a role in that, be that Severn Trent, be that us as the Highways Authority, be that a riparian owner, private owner, basically landowner, etc., to understand who has a responsibility in trying to address that issue. That's where our duty ends. We have no duty to solve it, unless, for instance, it was a highways drainage issue that covered it, because then that swaps to our duty as the Highway Authority to get it sorted. However, if it's Severn Trent, we can point it out to them and ask them nicely, but we can't make them. And if it's a third party, or in some cases where there is no particular party, but you know, it's accumulation of a whole host of things and there's no easy answer to it, actually it's very, very difficult, and I can understand the frustrations. But again, I think, you know, there isn't always clear communication on what our role is in the whole kind of flooding water management matter. But I agree, it is not always easier either for residents, for members or for ourselves in order to, you know, take some of these issues forward. I do take your point, however, if it's not something we can help with, where do we signpost people to go next? And, you know, yes, that is part of our role as a lead local flood authority. In terms of potholes and, you know, packaging up, yes, we always try to do that. And I think what I would say at the moment, and even with the regards to the Dr. Bremner's reference to the ones in Market Harbour and how they were responded to, I think at the moment there's a real quantity of them anyway. You know, we go out to an area, we're going out to a lot in that area. We recognise we have a particular peak of an issue to deal with now, and we will do that. So maybe we won't be doing the normal packaging thing. There's always the element whereby under our existing category, if it's a safety issue, we need to go out and do it quickly. But if it's not, if it's the 90-day ones, we will still package those up and go for that approach. We have to. And we will, when we can, in the majority of times, go for a first-time fix. Sometimes there are some reasons why we can't, i.e. we have to order in traffic management to shut down a junction, for instance. You know, so there is reasons why we might do a temporary fix on safety basis.
Thank you, Anne. Dr. Bremner, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just two quick questions. On page 22, and the second one's about microsimulation again, but bear with me. The last point, I've been looking at the tables, and there seems to be a discrepancy here. In column 1, it says it's county-wide. It says walking cycling strategy, but then the intervention's only in Melton. That's not county-wide. And if it is county-wide, could you slip a bit to the Market Harbour transport strategy on page 21? And if it is for Melton only, could column 1 be changed? Second question, bit facetious, I realise. Will the government, in terms of microsimulation models for your funding bids, are you confident, and I expect you are, that the mandarins in central government will accept the qualities of the models we produce? Because there's models coming from every authority, and there might be different qualities of model. So what is the current model that the central government is looking at to make really good decisions on quickly? And is our model it?
Okay, on the cycling one there, county-wide, I suspect this has happened because that, and I always knew it was LCLIPS, but that's not that acronym, that great big long acronym there, was we had the opportunity to bid for funding for professional consultancy support in helping us develop up these walking and cycling infrastructure plans from government. We were successful in that, and they're coming in and working. We get so many hours of support in order to help us deliver that. We've obviously focused on Melton for this. I think there are a number of reasons. We have the Melton Transport Strategy, of which the Melton Mowbray Distributor Road is one part, but only one part. There's walking, cycling, congestion relief in the town centre, etc. And I suspect that's why we've wanted to focus on Melton at the moment. The point about that consultancy support, however, is that we get the learning as a local authority, and then we use that across the county. So I suspect that's why we've taken it as a county-wide approach here, but then, you know, actually, when the reality is the bit of work that's happening at the moment is Melton, what we need to do is take the learning from that and then spread it across the county. But I agree, there's a bit of a misnomer there, and we could be clearer on that. So apologies for that. Your second point was micro-simulation. Oh yes, and how do we know we're at the right standard? It's not just one model. We have a micro-simulation, or what we're developing is a number of micro-simulation models for, you know, each of our market towns. For any model, in order to be able to use it then, say for instance, as part of your business case for bidding for funding, you have to have a model validation report. And I'm sorry, I'm way out of touch with this because I haven't actually done it myself for years, but there's certain things there you have to meet certain criteria, and they will look at certain aspects of your model to make sure it is to the right standards. So we have to produce that with every model, and we'll have to submit that with our bid to show that, you know, our modelling evidence is up to the right standard, because here's our validation report, and they will check that off. So that in some ways is the quality control that the government, or anybody else, not just government, anybody else would be looking at. Even if we get a transport assessment in from a developer that's got modelling work, we will ask to see that model validation work if it's not one of our own models, to know that it is to the right standards. So it's kind of an industry, you know, practice.
Thank you, Anne. That was very helpful. And finally, Mr. Bolter, please.
Thanks, Chair. This is to put something on the record, because we mentioned it this morning, but there's no minutes taken of this morning's meeting, so I want it something minuted. On the bridge replacement programme, or bridge works inspections programme, there's a bridge in Wixton that was been deferred. It was going to be rebuilt, been deferred for some time, and I'm concerned about the condition of it, as are many other members. It's what we call the Blue Bridge between Elston Lane and Stonesby Avenue. So it's on the border of over in Wixton and Leicester. It's now got quite large cracks in the parapet of the bridge, which concerns people. But the biggest concern is at the moment there's a metal footbridge that people go across, which is not really very safe for people to go along, because there are no lights on it, and it can be easily blocked at either end, and you're trapped in the middle of a steel structure. So the idea was to actually replace the road bridge with a wider bridge and include the pedestrian footbridge. It doesn't appear on this programme. It used to appear on the programme. It's disappeared. The condition of the bridge is getting worse. So for the record, in case something was to happen, like in other areas where the parapet's fallen down the railway line, and so I want it recorded that we've raised it here. Whether it's us or whether it's rail track, I'm not really bothered about, or British Rail, but somebody somewhere has got to take control of this and actually do something about it.
Yes, Anne.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Bolter did mention this to me this morning, and what I have ascertained since that time is the road bridges Network Rail's, the footbridge is ours. It was a scheme because it was to be renewed as part of the Midland Main Line electrification. Obviously, as you're aware, the Midland Main Line electrification is no longer going ahead, and I think that's why the reason it's come off. I have actually then since this morning, ask for an update on the condition of that footbridge, and I will come back and advise. And obviously, you know, depending on the outcome of that, will dictate whether that goes on to this year's or a future year's programme. We will come back to you, however.
Thank you very much, Anne. With no more questions or comments, Cabinet is being asked to approve this report, and our comments will be fed into that paper to help them with their deliberations. Thank you for those. As a reminder, our next meeting is scheduled for Thursday the 31st of May at 2 o'clock. And as I said earlier, there are no items that I am taking as urgent or have been notified to me that needs to be taken as urgent, which does in fact bring this afternoon's meeting to an end. Thank you all for your attendance, thank you for your contributions, and good afternoon.